A series of sinister crimes kept New York on edge for years. A mysterious man prowled the city after dark, stealing the name of the notorious Zodiac killer from California and claiming one target for each of the 12 astrological signs. The streets were full of police officers searching every corner, waiting for the copycat to make a mistake. And one day, he did. So, who was New York's Zodiac? And what tiny mistake turned years of fear into a match police could prove? New York in 1990 was loud with sirens and headlines, a city averaging about 5 murders a night. In that noise, patterns got swallowed. Detectives on both sides of the borough line were staring at shootings that looked random because nothing obvious tied them together. But the gunman wasn't random. He wanted to be known. The violence began to take shape that spring. At 3 a.m. on March 8th, 49-year-old Mario Orozco was hobbling home through East New York, Brooklyn, leaning on a heavy wooden cane. This part of Brooklyn was notorious for drugs, crime, and poverty. Despite poor eyesight and a congenital limp, he worked the tough job as a restaurant dishwasher rather than rely on public assistance. The late shifts meant a post-midnight subway ride and a lonely walk through near-empty blocks. He didn't see the young man in a maroon beret shadowing him from the cemetery's edge. Without a word, the stalker stepped out near the intersection of Atlantic and Sheridan Avenues and shot Orozco in the back with a 9mm zip gun, so quickly Orozco never caught a glimpse of him. The attacker then disappeared. Orozco's sign was Scorpio. He survived and managed to crawl home and call 911. He later told the police that the assailant wore a brown ski mask and gloves, the only thing he noticed. The bullet remained in Mario's spine, leaving the police with virtually no physical evidence. At about 3 a.m. on March 29, 1990, 34-year-old Jermaine Montenestro walked through East New York, deciding between his girlfriend's place in the Bronx and his father's nearby apartment. He was a day laborer. After work, he went to a party in the Bronx and had a few beers. Unsteady and smelling of alcohol, he passed a high school where a young man on the bleachers watched, then slipped in behind. Near a subway station, 6 blocks from where Mario Orozco had been injured, Montenestro was approaching the gate to his father's house when a single shot was fired. As he lay on the pavement, the assailant went through his pockets, pulled his wallet, left the cash, and disappeared. His father came out and took him to the hospital. Montenestro was a Gemini. The bullet passed through his left side, leaving him seriously injured. He was very lucky to survive. He never saw the attacker. There were no eyewitnesses. The bullet fragments found at the scene weren't useful for ballistics. The police didn't connect the 2 shootings. The mystery gunman seemed like a ghost, leaving no trace. Joseph Proci liked to roam late at night through East New York and nearby Woodhaven, Queens. He was 78, walked with a cane, and though he'd survived combat in World War II, every step now took effort. Living alone on public assistance and struggling with short-term memory, he sometimes, to his embarrassment, searched trash cans for food. Woodhaven borders East New York and faced the same mix of violent crime, drugs, and poverty. Friends warned him to stop the night walks, but he wouldn't give up one of the few routines he enjoyed, and he disliked the idea of scavenging where neighbors might see. On May 31st, 1990, at about 1:30 a.m., Proci headed home. He lived around the corner from the same subway station where Mario Orozco and Jermaine Montenestro had exited before they were attacked. A young man approached Proci on 87th Road as he was entering his brownstone and asked for a glass of water. Proci told him to go to his own apartment for a glass of water, then turned his back and kept moving. The man followed and shot him in the back. Proci's neighbors heard the gunshot and called the police. The attacker left a handwritten note on the steps of Proci's front stoop, weighed down by 3 small rocks, and disappeared. Police also found a projectile. Detectives were shaken by the shooter's eerie, occult-tinged message. It said, "This is the Zodiac. The 12 sign will die when the belts in the heaven are seen." Even before anyone said the word serial, they knew this wasn't a simple robbery. Proci was alive, but in critical condition. His sign was Taurus. He died of his wounds on June 24th at the hospital. Before he passed, Queens detectives managed to interview him about the attack. He gave a vague portrait of the assailant, an unkempt man with a mustache and beard. Prochy himself made the job harder. He changed his account more than once, first describing the assailant as black, then saying he might have been white, or possibly Hispanic. It was a dark night, and Prochy's memory was failing. At times, he didn't recognize the detectives who had already questioned him. There was another witness, a young woman who saw the gunman run. She was meeting secretly with her boyfriend at the time, but she and the married boyfriend refused to cooperate, fearing their affair would be exposed. Days later, a bizarre letter arrived at the New York Post. The writer, signing himself Zodiac, listed the dates of 3 shootings along with each victim's astrological sign. He also mentioned that the bullets lacked grooves. It was a true detail only the killer could know. There were no fingerprints on the letter, so the gunman probably wore gloves. Detectives found the 2 matches, Mario Orozco and Jermaine Montenestro. They realized the drawing on the pie slice coincided with the 3 astrological signs of the 3 victims: Taurus, Scorpio, and Gemini. So now the Zodiac was getting ready to kill the rest of the 12 signs. The rules of the game were ugly and efficient. The gunman wasn't leaving the kind of ballistic signatures the lab could easily match. He built zip guns, crude single-shot weapons he could rebarrel and discard, making traditional comparisons maddening. Letters arrived with taunts and odd details. Control is a story we tell ourselves. The writer wanted police to chase his narrative. He wanted to control it. When those letters reached newsrooms, panic could be as dangerous as the weapon. On June 19th, the New York Post broke the story with the front-page headline, "Riddle of the Zodiac Shooter," putting pressure on police. The headline did what headlines do. It poured gasoline on a city already on edge. People weren't afraid of the dark. They were afraid of what emerged from it. The idea that the notorious San Francisco Zodiac had relocated to New York and continued his crimes after many years seemed terrifying. New York police sent the letter to San Francisco. 2 weeks later, they received a reply. A handwriting analyst confirmed the New York shooter was a copycat. The case was full of mystery. If the signs were part of the message, how did he know the victim's zodiac signs? Detectives chased that question for years. Behind the letters was a person, Heriberto Seda, a young man in East New York who kept his room in his mother's apartment immaculate. At 22, he had no job, no friends, and a life that was extremely limited. He read about guns and famous killers. He had meticulously assembled a scrapbook on the New York Zodiac case and kept it proudly alongside earlier albums he'd made on Ted Bundy, the California Zodiac Killer, and other notorious serial killers. Seda admired a criminal who had never been caught. He believed he was smarter, that homemade metal and borrowed mythology could make him untouchable. Detectives from Queens and Brooklyn were hauled into the same room. Chief of Detectives Joseph Borelli ordered the teams to share everything and christened the all-out hunt Operation Watchdog. Tip lines lit up. Psychics called. People started reporting on friends and neighbors. A young man was fingerprinted after he checked out an astrology book from the New York Public Library. Vigilante groups like the Guardian Angels roamed East New York. In the task force bullpen, the case earned its own corners of obsession. One desk chased occult references. Another charted astrological claims on a wall of dates. According to an astronomer, a 21-day cycle was being followed. On March 8th, the constellations of the 7 sisters, Taurus and Orion, aligned at the time of the shooting. On March 29th, the same trio, another shooting. On May 31st, the trio returned at 2:04 a.m., shooting. If the killer really followed the stars, the window for the next attack, according to the astronomer's chart, fell in the small hours of June 21st. Detective Larry Milanese said, "It's never been done before, where you were able to actually predict when a shooting was going to take place within a couple of hours. The plan was simple and massive: flood the predicted ground." The night came. New York held its breath. Patrol cars idled in East New York. Foot teams moved beneath broken streetlights. Police even staged vans that looked like ice cream trucks. Detectives watched for a man who might ask a stranger's sign or shadow someone. Hours passed, no gunfire, no arrest. Then the radios cracked with a report, but not from the predicted grid. The shot came from across the river, in Central Park. On a park bench, 30-year-old Larry Parham had made his bed for the night. He had mental health issues and a history of substance abuse. He'd hidden his wallet in a sneaker. Street sense learned the hard way. He wasn't what people pictured when they heard homeless. Clean-cut, neatly dressed, and saving money. He reportedly had about $4,000 in the bank and believed the park felt safer than a shelter. As he slept, a young man watched from a nearby bench, then crept over, took the wallet, looked through it, and left the $49 in cash untouched. The wallet went back. A shot rang out. Parham lived. His sign was cancer. Cops found a note with the killer's mark, weighed down by rocks. There was the fourth sign, cancer. The Zodiac was in control again. The bullet lodged in the bench and matched the one from Prochi's scene. For detectives, the Central Park shot hit like a gut punch. Still, Parham's survival meant a voice. Larry didn't see the assailant, but a couple of days before the attack, a man sat beside him and started a casual conversation. During the conversation, he asked his birth sign. A sketch artist drew the man from Larry's description. A black male, around 30, 5'10" to 6 feet. The sketch was released to the public. That week, the NYPD warned New Yorkers not to give their birth dates or signs to strangers. The next day, another letter arrived at the New York Post. The writer tried to weld himself to a legend and convince the public there was only one Zodiac. It was a dare to the city and a challenge to the press that had started calling him a copycat, a label that frustrated the shooter. He wanted the fear that came with the brand, and he wanted it uncontested. The point wasn't truth. He tried to pull the spotlight onto his version of events. Detectives worked the envelope for whatever it could give them. Finally, they found a partial thumbprint. It didn't match any in the database. Detectives circled the next projected date, July 12th, and deployed in force again. This time, nothing. Cycle after cycle passed. The first wave began to lose momentum. The task force shrank from 50 officers to 18. New York moved on. Orozco kept walking his neighborhood, refusing to let fear define his life. Montenestro stayed away from cameras and headlines. Parham, the man who woke to a bullet and a miracle, leaned on faith. Devoutly Christian, he forgave his attacker. 3 different survivors, 3 different ways to carry the same night forward. The New York Zodiac craved recognition. But when the pressure spiked, he did something maddening. He went quiet. Whether that silence came from caution, satisfaction, or fear was unclear. The streets got noisy with other crimes. The killer, meanwhile, learned something too. He had tested a lever and felt how much power it could wield. Silence didn't mean safety. It meant he was thinking. Seda visited the scenes of his crimes. He studied the coverage he'd caused and the mistakes he'd made. He changed his rules. The first 4 shootings had happened on Thursdays, so he changed the day. The return of the Zodiac began a year later at the edge of Highland Park. On August 10, 1992, Patricia Fonte met a good-looking stranger near the reservoir. Patricia had mental health issues and was homeless. Seda struck up a conversation. She asked him for a cigarette, and he invited her down to the reservoir's edge to smoke. At 1:30 a.m., Seda fired a .22 caliber zip gun, but Patricia got up and fought back. He then stabbed her multiple times. Investigators later counted more than 100 wounds. She died there by the water. Her sign was Leo. Seda kept returning to the same terrain, paths, benches, the shallow dark around the reservoir. Psychology, not mysticism, explains that cluster. He knew the ground, the lines of sight, the exits. He wanted control without risk, a neighborhood he could move through like a ghost. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a man shrinking his world to places where he felt powerful. On June 4th, 1993, 40-year-old Jim Weber, a construction worker who was unemployed at the time, met Seda near Highland Park around midnight. He was shot in the buttocks and survived. On July 20th, 1993, 40-year-old Joseph Diacone, a mental patient, was shot in the neck at close range outside of Highland Park at 11:35 a.m. He did not survive. 12 days earlier, he had escaped from a psychiatric center. On October 2, 1993, 40-year-old Diane Ballard was sitting on a bench in Highland Park when she was shot in the neck. She lived. The bullet lodged against her spine, leaving her partially paralyzed. But she saw the shooter and was able to describe him. A sketch was made. A Hispanic man with a thick mustache, wearing a hat. However, Seda changed his look and wore different hats. He also grew a mustache and later shaved it off to confuse the police. In March 1994, officers stopped Seda outside his East New York apartment building after noticing a bulge in his jacket pocket and found an illegal zip gun. He was polite and cooperative. At the lab, the weapon was mislabeled as inoperable. The officers didn't know how to use it and were afraid to test fire it. Seda was released a week later. The gun was eventually proven to be the one used in some of the shootings. Seda took what happened as a sign that he was untouchable, that consequences no longer applied to him, much like San Francisco's Zodiac. 2 months after that, another shot in Highland Park went unreported. On June 10, 1994, the Zodiac shot a white man with a .22 caliber zip gun. If the Zodiac's next letter hadn't come, those nights might have stayed as dots that never connected. The letter arrived on August 1, 1994. It contained a list of 5 victims and a strange code later read as maritime signal flags. When decoded, it read, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am in control. There will be more, yours truly." The envelope carried a love stamp. The letter ended with a line, "Sleep, my little dead, how we loathe them." The killer taunted police and boasted that he had outsmarted them, writing Zodiac 9, NYPD 0. 4 of the attacks were confirmed. 1 wasn't. Either way, the effect was the same. The city snapped back into fear. Pedestrians quickened their pace through parks and stations. A second task force was formed that month. Investigators compared the partial fingerprint lifted from an earlier Zodiac letter near the Central Park shooting against prints from 4,500 people who had arrest histories and lived in those areas. No match. Seda, who had built an identity from someone else's shadows, decided to stop, to avoid capture like the original Zodiac. Then he couldn't. That's not genius. It's compulsion with a press kit. The killer went quiet for nearly 2 years, until June 18, 1996, when officers were called to a domestic dispute in Brooklyn. One afternoon, a scream spilled into the hallway of a building on Pitkin Avenue in East New York. Inside a third-floor apartment, a young man named Eddie opened fire. Eddie was Seda's nickname. At home, he'd tried to control his sister. As she got older and pushed back, especially when she started seeing men, his anger escalated and he shot her in the buttocks. The incident started over loud music. His 17-year-old sister and her friend had the volume up. His sister didn't listen to Seda. He also knew the visitor was a drug dealer and hated the idea of his sister seeing him. He started pounding on the wall they shared with her bedroom. Gladys understood the signal. Her brother wanted the guest gone. In the past, she'd listened, but this time she was angry and tired of supporting him financially. She ignored him. Enraged, Seda grabbed one of his zip guns and fired into the wall. Gladys screamed at him to stop. They faced off in the living room as he waved the weapon, and when she tried to bolt through the front door, he shot her in the back. She wasn't incapacitated. She made it into a neighbor's apartment. The frightened neighbor locked the door and called 911. The call brought a wall of police to the building and turned the hallway into a negotiation line. 28-year-old Seda staged homemade guns at each window and ran back and forth between them. His sister fled, but her friend shut himself in her bedroom, turning it into a hostage situation. Seda was firing out the apartment window, 13 rounds at responding officers, before he began talking with police. Police evacuated the entire building, reached his door, and spent hours trying to talk him down in the hallway. After about 3 hours of negotiation, he signaled he was ready to give up. Officers on the roof lowered a bucket, and he loaded it with his weapons. They needed 3 full hauls to collect all the zip guns and ammunition. The guns were all homemade, the kind once common among street kids. There were also 2 crude pipe bombs. Seda was taken into custody. They took him to the precinct. At the desk, he began to write. At the end of his statement, he drew a mark, a crosshair with 3 sevens. Detective Danny Powers recognized the symbol and decided to check it. Investigators took major case prints from Seda, fingerprints plus palms and the sides of the fingers, to compare against the Zodiac prints on file. They pulled the stored envelope and letter from the first wave. The print matched. This was the Zodiac. But Seda denied everything, talking only about the Bible and religion. Detectives needed his confession. They placed photos from the Zodiac crime scenes on the wall behind Seda in the interview room and questioned him about the case. Seda kept glancing back. He grew confused and angry. After a couple of hours, he confessed. Seda spent years trying to be known by his handwriting. In the end, it was his handwriting that gave him away. Seda faced 2 trials, one in Queens and another in Brooklyn. He bragged that his bullets had no grooves, but he was wrong. Even a pipe barrel leaves characteristic tool marks on a bullet, and examiners matched 3 of them. Prosecutors also introduced DNA from a stamp on the 1994 letter sent to the New York Post. In court, Seda looked mild-mannered. One juror even remarked that he seemed like such a nice boy, but his temper flared. He repeatedly disrupted proceedings. During testimony, he grew visibly angry, said, "I don't want to be here anymore," and rushed up the steps toward the bench, attempting to attack the judge. In outbursts to the judge, he shouted, "It's as if I'm not here. I'm being ignored," seeking attention and significance. There's one gap in the story. How did he know? Seda never explained how he knew his victims' birthdays. Investigators believed he tailed Mario and looked through his mail. Montenegro lost his passport the night he was shot. Proci likely spoke with him, and with Larry he checked the wallet, saw the birth sign, and then shot him. However, Seda never disclosed it. For him, it was something he could hold over law enforcement and taunt them one last time. Seda was resentful that several victims survived, saying that if his weapon had been made better, there would have been more people dead. He even described an ultimate plan to plant crude pipe bombs under his seat in the middle of a large IMAX theater in Manhattan and watch them detonate. One officer said, he kept talking about Jesus and good and evil and salvation. But he never explained how he made his jump from a Roman Catholic upbringing to a Zodiac serial killer. Seda was born on July 31st, 1967. He was a Leo. He grew up in a tiny apartment in a dangerous part of the city with his mother and half-sister. The neighborhood was rough, full of gangs, dealers, and sex workers. His father left the family when Seda was young, and money was often scarce. At home, he tried to exert control, especially over his younger half-sister Gladys. Her personality ran opposite his. She was outgoing, friendly, and well-liked in the neighborhood. When she was little, he doted on her. As she got older, the relationship turned abusive, both physically and emotionally. She sometimes came to school with bruises, prompting teachers to involve social services. Around 1989, the beatings stopped. They still didn't get along. Seda was angry with his sister for spending time with people tied to drugs and claimed he tipped off authorities about several local dealers. Seda didn't date girls. He was extremely religious and unusually withdrawn. A bright student who didn't drink or use drugs and kept his room immaculate. He went to church regularly, which made his mother proud. At 16, he was suspended from high school for carrying a weapon and never went back. The setback curdled into resentment and rage. He withdrew to his bedroom, rarely went out, and built a private fantasy world. By 1989, he wanted to be a soldier and owned several hunting knives. He once aimed for the Green Berets, but failed the entrance test by a few points, a pivotal blow he didn't take well. When he failed, he tended to blame others, convinced the world was against him. He was out of work and living on his mother's support, but he scraped together cash by jamming coin return slots on payphones and vending machines with plastic bags, then coming back later to pull out the trapped coins. A neighbor later called him a chronically unemployed recluse. With no real friends, he spent most of his time alone, sleeping most of the day and watching TV. Violence fascinated him. He read obsessively about guns and serial killers, even collecting serial killer playing cards. Ted Bundy was his idol. One day, he saw a program about the Zodiac killer, and something clicked. He began to imagine a role for himself, borrowing power from the Zodiac's legend. In his mind, it offered a way to claim attention and a sense of purpose he felt the world had denied him. Maybe the Zodiac's mask could make him someone. He had never held steady work and had almost no income, so buying a firearm wasn't an option. In person, he seemed ordinary, but he lived for the attacks. They became his occupation. Immature, he craved status, but only proved himself a failure. Seda had a narcissistic streak, arrogant and at times pleased by the fear he caused. His victim choices reflected his cowardice. People who were weak or off guard, sleeping, elderly, homeless, vulnerable, with a limp and a cane, and even his own sister. He cast himself as someone on a higher plane, guided by a divine mission, but in practice he fed a hunger for attention and violence. He called killing people addictive and said getting away with it felt like being high. Seda showed little empathy. He attacked more than 9 people to fuel his need for power, bragging that he was getting better at it. His words were a tangle of pride, denial, and the belief that the world had misunderstood him. Seda claimed he was cleaning up society by targeting people he saw as drug users. He said he had to kill them because they were evil. In describing his victims, he reduced them to inanimate objects, not real people who felt pain or had lives. Seda said he chose them because he just got a feeling about them. He admitted he became furious after he failed the Green Beret's entrance exam. He said, "I thought, what am I going to do with all this information I have?" After he watched a documentary about the Zodiac killer for the first time, he thought, "Holy smokes, this guy terrorized a whole city and never got caught. I got nothing to live for. I'm not getting no sex. I don't got no job. I already got those skills. I could be famous. I could do that." Seda was sentenced to 232 years to life in prison. He won't be eligible for parole until he's 264. After the verdict, Seda said, "I love that they put me in jail because now I don't have to deal with things I was dealing outside." In prison, Seda spent his time reading the Bible every day, quoting scripture to other inmates, watching hunting shows on TV, and making origami animals out of colored paper. After his arrest, he tried to make peace with his half-sister Gladys, but she refused to take his calls. For years, the only person who came to see him in maximum security was his mother. After about 7 lonely years inside, he started a relationship with Cynthia China Blast, a transgender woman who was incarcerated for a gang-related murder. Cynthia was born Luis Alberto Morales on September 11, 1974. Seda had his first romantic kiss at 35, when he and Cynthia shared a first kiss through the prison bars. Cynthia later described that moment. It was weird. I'd read a lot of books about serial killers, and I didn't trust him, like he might bite my face off or something. But Seda was visibly nervous, shaking, and she said he seemed inexperienced like a virgin and didn't really know how to kiss at first. Seda became intensely attached to Cynthia. Ironically, he overlooked parts of her past that, outside prison, he had claimed to despise, including being a former drug dealer and a gang member, the same kinds of people he'd once said he wanted to clean up from his neighborhood. At Cynthia's trial, witnesses testified that Cynthia and another Latin King gang member had killed a 13-year-old runaway. They also accused Cynthia of assaulting the girl, an allegation Cynthia denied. She said she'd been wearing a skirt that night and had never had sex with a female in her life. She said the gang told her to clean up the scene, which she did. According to her, the body was already in a box, and they later set it on fire. In 1996, Cynthia was convicted of murder and manslaughter and sentenced to 25 years to life. Seda worked as a porter, which let him out of his cell from 3 to 8:30 p.m. every day to bring other inmates food trays and buckets of warm water. In spring 2003, he started paying attention to Cynthia. He said he liked her smile and her character, so he began slipping her extra meal trays and candy. Cynthia said she thought Seda was cute. Within days, he sent her a kite, a letter saying he felt she was special and that he wanted to be with her. Cynthia had already heard rumors that the quiet, smiling Porter had once gone on a shooting spree in New York, and she was intrigued. She said she's always been drawn to bad boys. By then, she had a tough reputation of her own, heavily tattooed, with a scorpion on the right side of her face. When Seda gave her the first letter, she joked with him, "Are you going to kill me? Are you going to ask for my birth sign?" Seda replied, "No, I would never hurt you." Cynthia got a tattoo on her ring finger with Seda's initials and a small zodiac sign, and a large back piece showing their astrological signs linked together, hers, Virgo, and his, Leo. She even started covering her cell with zodiac symbols, taping them to her TV and walls, and called it romantic. She said that before meeting him, she'd slept with some of the most infamous violent offenders in the New York prison system. In a letter to Seda, she wrote, "It seems that my only attractions are to society's sickest and most twisted lowlifes." Seda said, "I liked that she was excited by my murders. It was a little plus for us. She used to put the zodiac sign all over her cell as a tribute to me. I'd see one and say, 'Is that a new one?' And she'd say yes. It flattered me." He said he wasn't gay, stressing he focused on her feminine exterior while she openly framed herself as his wife. He said he wasn't interested in her body until after the operation, and that he thought of her as a woman. The physical side of their relationship mostly went one way. He allowed certain things, but didn't do them in return. Both of them were fine with that. Cynthia has said that even though she loves him, he can still unsettle her. She said, "He'll come to my cell and look at me like a cannibal or something. I'm like, yo, what are you looking at?" There's a human truth beneath the theatrics. Most of us want to be seen as more than we are. But instead of growing through the process of learning, building, becoming, he wanted a legend's shadow to make him bigger and assembled an identity from clippings and codes. Seda gets mad if you call him a copycat. He wanted control that looked cosmic, but in reality remained ordinary and infantile. An imposter who wrecked his own life while taking pieces of others. Please leave a comment and tell me what you think of the case. For more true crime cases, subscribe to my channel and watch the playlist to explore more chilling crimes. See you next time.